Hi everyone. I'm going to talk about chess visualization in this video. When I was in high school, I had a friend who played chess, and we would take the city bus home from school, and we didn't have a pocket chess set or anything like that, but he liked to play chess in his head. So he asked me to do it one day. We would sit on the bus and he would say, okay, I'll go first, E4. And I would respond E5. And we'd play back and forth in our head. He was very good at this, and I discovered I was very bad at it. After about 7 or 8 moves, I would lose track of where the pieces were. I couldn't remember. And I would try to stall and distract, and I was embarrassed, and I wanted to get off the bus as quickly as possible, hoping my stop would come before we had to get past move 7 or 8. And I never got better at it. The more I tried, it made absolutely no improvement whatsoever. To this day, when I read a chess book, I can read a game from move 1 in my head, but only if I already know the opening. If there's some random sequence of moves from the beginning, again, I'm very poor at that. I cannot do it for more than 6, 7, or 8 moves before I'm totally lost. Well, I discovered in recent years that I actually have a disorder called aphantasia, and this means that I'm not able to see images in my mind's eye like most people are. Like you can conjure up a picture of an apple, a red apple with a stem and a green leaf. I can't do that. I don't see pictures in my head at all. I just recently discovered there's a name for that. It's, as I said, called aphantasia, but I was aware of this my whole life. I never really talked about it with anybody, though. It didn't seem really important. And in fact, for a long time, I didn't even know other people could see images in their head. I had no idea at all. I thought people were just speaking metaphorically when they said, oh, I can picture her now. She has brown hair and green eyes, and I just thought they were remembering a list of facts. Brown hair, green eyes. That's how I remember people, as a list of facts. Everything is abstract in my mind. I cannot picture, even right now, sitting here, I cannot picture what my wife looks like. But I can remember what she looks like. I know the color of her eyes, the color of her hair, the fact that she wears glasses, how she dresses, and so forth. Also, going along with this aphantasia, I have trouble recognizing faces. When I see people, I generally know who I'm looking at, sometimes a little bit based on the way their face looks, but mostly based on other characteristics like the way they walk, the way they move, what they're wearing, the context of where I'm seeing these people, things like that tip me off to who I am talking to. But very often I can walk right past somebody in a hallway and it's somebody I know and not really even recognize them. It's a little embarrassing, but I get by. Anyway, sometimes when I read a chess book, I have trouble following along. A lot of chess books have diagrams every somewhere between a few moves and a dozen moves. There's a diagram. And I always wondered, are people supposed to be reading these chess books without the aid of playing through the moves on a board? Is the intent to be able to just read the game, see it in your head, and then the diagram kind of helps you move along? Well, I don't know if everybody can do that, and I'm interested in other people and what they do when they read a chess book. So if you have any thoughts on this about chess visualization, can you visualize a game in your head? How many moves can you think ahead? Can you follow a game in a book? Can you follow the first dozen moves without playing them on a board? If you have any feedback for me, go ahead and write down in the comments below. Last night I was reading a new book about Bobby Fischer called Bobby Fischer and His World, and I was reading it in bed without a chessboard. And there's a lot of biographical stuff and stories that I was reading. That's not actually all chess. But I came to a game that he played. And by the way, I'll show you the game. It was a very early game. In fact, this game was not even known until last year. It's a very early game that Bobby Fischer played in 1953. He was born in 1943, so he was very young when he played this. And the position we're looking at here was shown in the book. After the first 12 moves were played, this is the position the players arrived at. And then the sequence of moves that you see there on the right was given in the book. And so I tried to think my way through those moves and visualize them. And with some effort, I was able to do that. Now, I don't actually visualize the pieces moving, and I can't see when it says H4, I can't see a pawn on the H4 square. I just remember, okay, now there's no more pawn on H2, it's now on H4. And I try to remember that. Okay, if you've ever watched grandmasters play chess, I'm thinking of Nakamura. When I watch Nakamura play on YouTube or on a stream, you often see him looking up in the air, and that's because he's analyzing, and I imagine that he can see the board and all of its pieces in his head, and he wants to analyze a sequence of moves into the future. And I think the reason he looks away from the board rather than looking at the board is because looking at the board can be a distraction, because you're seeing all these fixed pieces on their squares not moving. But when you look away and you visualize the board in your head, which I can't really do, I'm guessing that Nakamura is looking away because in his mind he is able to erase pieces and move them, and he's not distracted by the fixed pieces on the board. So that's why often grandmasters look away when they're visualizing into the future. I prefer to look at the board when I do that. It helps me to see the 64 squares and memorize where pieces have disappeared and where they end up on. Anyway, I was looking at this particular diagram and trying to play through those 5 moves that you see there on the right. And when I got to move 17 there, where it says queen takes h7, win for white, I was confused. I didn't know if that meant black resigned, or if black was mated, or if black's flag fell, because I was confused about the position. I wasn't seeing it clearly or remembering it clearly in my mind. But I struggled through it, and I went back over the moves, and then I discovered that yes, indeed, I understand exactly why that's a win for white. Anyway, before we go through those 5 moves, let's talk about this game a bit. So as I said, this was played in 1943. It was Dan Mayers had the white pieces and Fischer had black. And it was played at the Brooklyn Chess Club, and it was a blitz game. So it was not a tournament game, it was just an offhand blitz game at the Brooklyn Chess Club. And I'll show you the game that led up to this position, the first 12 moves. It was a King's Gambit, and it was a Bishop's Gambit, as it's called. The Bishop's Gambit line is this move Bishop to c4 here, which was a favorite way for Fischer to play the King's Gambit as white. He stuck with that throughout his career. In fact, he got to play this particular variation twice in tournament play against grandmasters. I think he won both times, and he always stuck with this move Bishop to c4. Now that's an interesting move because it allows black to play queen to h4 check, forcing the king over to the f1 square, and it's a good line to look into, and I may do a video on the King's Gambit or several videos on the King's Gambit in the future. And it's a very interesting line, but that's not how black played in this game. Fischer chose knight to f6. So he's attacking white's center pawn, and the player playing white, Dan Mayers, played knight c3 to protect it, and then c6, intending d5 to take a stake in the center. d4, white gets the dual pawns in the center and attacks the f4 pawn with his dark squared bishop. Fischer pins the knight, and then white expands in the center with e5. And Fischer plants his knight on the e4 square, putting more pressure on the c3 knight, which is pinned. And black is threatening to win a pawn on the c3 square. And more, knight takes c3, b takes c3, bishop takes c3 would fork the king and the rook. So white plays queen to h4, or h5 rather, which is a mate threat on f7. So black doesn't have time to win material. He has to defend against the mate on the f7 square. He castles to defend, and then white supports the knight on c3 with his other knight. Okay, Fischer takes his claim in the center with d5 as intended by his move c6 earlier. And here white pulls the bishop back to b3, and I think that was a poor move. The bishop would be much more active on d3. It would be a better diagonal for that bishop pointed at the h7 square. White might also have considered taking that pawn en passant, but I think bishop to d3 is the move favored by the engine. Okay, and then Fischer attacks the queen. The queen moves to h6. Bishop comes in and threatens the defending knight. So this knight here is defending the c3 knight. So if Fischer takes the knight on e2, then he's removed a defender and can win a pawn at least on c3. So because of that, white defends the knight on c3 further with bishop to d2. But this allowed Fischer to take the bishop and draw the king out. And here, Fischer makes a poor move. The engine says that black is winning in this position and should play f6 to break up the center here and open the game since white's king is in the center of the board. But Fischer makes a poor move, which is g5 to protect his f4 pawn here. It looks solid at first, but it just gives white a hook into the position. White can now open the H file, and then the attack is unstoppable. So the position in one move goes from black winning to white winning. Okay, so now we look at these 5 moves on the right here, and maybe give it a try. Pause your video, play through those moves in your head, however you do that, and figure out what's going on in that final move, queen takes h7. Is it a mate? Is it not a mate? What's going on? Okay, hopefully you've had some success at that. Let's play through the moves ourselves now and see what happens. So h4 is a good move once you see that g5 pawn is moved forward, because that's a good pawn break and black can't stop the h file from opening up. White's going to play h takes g5 unless black takes first. And then the rook takes, and now there's a queen and rook battery against the h7 square. So Fischer has to defend on h7, and he plays bishop to f5 to do it. But then white triples up his heavy pieces on the h file. Okay, that's not really a threat to take on h7 though, because if white plays queen takes h7 check, bishop takes queen, rook takes bishop, that's not a mate. So what is the threat here? Well, you'll see in a second. Fischer plays his other bishop over to the e7 square, attacking the rook on h4, but white's rook was heading to g4 with check anyway. Okay, so the point of that move is the bishop cannot take the rook because the bishop is protecting against a mate on the h7 square. So Fischer decides to, he's completely lost here, but he decides to block the check with that bishop. And now the final move in the sequence is queen takes h7. And now that we look at the position, we can see that, yes, that is a checkmate because the bishop on g6 is pinned by the rook on g4. So if you were able to see in your head that that was a checkmate pretty easily, then you can visualize better than I can, because it took me a moment to completely understand that. I forgot that the rook was pinning the bishop in this position. And so I didn't know queen takes h7 was a mate, but it is. Now, I don't know how to improve chess visualization other than to practice it over and over and over again. So that's what I am going to do. I'm going to look at a lot of master games and freeze frame in certain positions, and you can analyze ahead yourself and guess the next move, or you can read the analysis given in a book and try to follow the moves in your head. So it's something that just requires practice. I don't know any techniques to be able to do that. There are lots of visualization errors people have classified, like a retained image error is a phrase I've heard, where you forget that a piece has moved and you've retained it on its original square, things like that. Maybe you can diagnose yourself and try to think clearly about what kinds of visualization problems you might be having, and then try to practice those things. But other than that, I really don't know how to get better at visualization. If anybody has tips for the rest of us and you want to answer in the comment section below, please do. All right, well, thanks for watching this video, and we got to see a treat, a very early game played by a 10-year-old Fischer. All right, bye.